A man wrote his own birthplace into his will. His DNA still would not confirm it. It was not simple. It was not clean. It was not the tidy nationality story taught in school. For centuries, almost no one questioned where Christopher Columbus came from. Then a signature nobody could decode, a language he refused to write in, and a genetic claim too strange to ignore started pulling that story apart. This is not about Italy or Spain. It is about a man who may have spent his life making sure no one could ever be certain who he was. Start inside a cathedral in Seville in front of a tomb held up by 4 bronze kings. That tomb is supposed to hold the bones of Christopher Columbus. For a long time, that was the whole story. Famous man, famous burial, settled biography. But look past the tomb, into the paperwork. In 1498, Columbus sat down and wrote a will. Not a casual letter, a legal document meant to outlive him. In it, he named his birthplace. He wrote that he came from Genoa and that his heirs should keep a house there because that is where he was born and that is where he came from. That should have ended the argument 500 years ago. It did not. Because right below that declaration, in his own hand, Columbus signed his name using a cipher nobody has ever fully solved. A pyramid of letters, symbols stacked above his signature like a code with no key. He told his sons to keep using it, not once, every time. A grown man at the height of his fame still protecting a mark that hid more than it showed, that is strange enough on its own. But there is something else. In everything Columbus wrote by hand that survives, letters, logs, notes in the margins of books, he never once wrote in Italian, not a line. A supposed son of Genoa, writing exclusively in Castilian and Latin for his entire adult life. For centuries, almost nobody thought that was worth questioning. He said Genoa. Most records agree. Historians point to notarial archives in Genoa and nearby Savona, contracts, tax records, family documents describing his father as a wool weaver, later a small trader in wine and cheese. That is an unusually thick paper trail for a man born in the 1450s, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But look at where most of that evidence actually comes from. Almost all of it is either written by Columbus himself, later in life, once he was already famous, or written about him after he had already become the man who crossed an ocean. The years that would be hardest to fake, the early years, are nearly blank. A child from a documented wool-working family should leave some trace before adulthood. Christopher Columbus barely does. A man this thoroughly recorded as an admiral is almost invisible as a boy. That gap should bother you. The traditional explanation is not stupid, and it is not propaganda. Genoa has the largest body of physical evidence of any origin theory connected to Columbus, by a wide margin. Notarial deeds, family trade, his own signed declaration. If you only look at the paperwork, Genoa wins easily. But paperwork explains where a man said he was from. It does not explain what he refused to say about everything else. It does not explain why someone raised in a Genoese household would abandon his native language completely, in writing, for his entire recorded life. It does not explain the signature he never let go of. And it does not explain why, long before anyone had DNA to argue about, serious historians kept proposing other origins entirely. Catalan, Portuguese, Galician, Greek, and most persistently, Jewish. Not because those theories were desperate guesses, but because the gaps in the official story were real, and somebody had to try filling them. That is where the story usually stalls. Two camps, arguing over old paper, going nowhere. Then, in October of 2024, a Spanish documentary changed the terms of the argument completely by bringing DNA into a fight that had only ever been fought with archives. A team led by a forensic scientist at the University of Granada announced they had recovered partial genetic material from remains linked to Columbus and from his son, Hernando. Using traces from the Y chromosome, the paternal line, and mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line, they said the signal was not consistent with a purely Italian origin. Instead, they described it as compatible with a broader Western Mediterranean background, possibly touching Sephardic Jewish ancestry. That is a careful sentence, and it matters that it stays careful. Not confirmed, not proven, compatible with. The findings were never published in a peer-reviewed journal. The underlying data was never released for other scientists to check. As of now, nobody outside that team has been able to independently verify the method, the samples, or the statistics behind the claim. Geneticists who reviewed what was shown publicly raised an uncomfortable point. There is no single marker that means Jewish. Ancestry testing on old, degraded remains tends to show partial statistical closeness to several populations at once, not one clean answer. Turning that into a headline is easy. Turning it into science is not. So here's the strange part. The claim is shaky, and it still will not go away. It keeps resurfacing from serious institutions, not internet rumor, because it is scratching at something the paper trail already made obvious. This man's identity does not fully add up, and no single piece of evidence, old or new, has closed the gap. To understand why that gap might exist at all, you have to stand somewhere else for a moment, not on a ship, in a room, with paperwork. Picture Spain in 1492. Not the caravels leaving port, the desks behind them. That same year, the Spanish crown signed the Alhambra Decree, ordering Jews across the kingdom to convert to Christianity or leave the country by the end of the summer. Tens of thousands were expelled outright. Far more had already converted under pressure in the decades before, becoming what the records called new Christians. Belief, family memory, and legal survival did not always line up. In that world, a family's past could be a liability. An unclear origin was not always confusion. Sometimes it was protection. Picture a household inside that pressure, a name quietly softened, a birthplace repeated so often it starts to sound rehearsed, a signature practiced over and over, until it stops meaning anything a stranger could read, and starts meaning something only the family understands. This is not a claim about one specific man's private thoughts. It is a pattern historians recognize across that era, in many families for the same reason. Certainty could get you noticed. Ambiguity could keep you alive. This is the part of the story that changes what everything before it means. The confusion around Columbus's origin was never obviously a failure of the archive. And it may not be a failure of the DNA either. It may be something closer to design. In a country where an unclear background could mean the difference between safety and the Inquisition's attention, deliberately blurring your own origin was not carelessness. It was a survival skill. If Columbus or the family before him carried any connection to Converso or Jewish ancestry, the smartest move available with a document like his 1498 will was exactly what he did. State an origin firmly, publicly, permanently, and never let anyone examine it closely again. That reframes the cipher completely. For 500 years, people have tried to crack it like a lock, assuming somewhere underneath it there is a clear answer waiting to be found. But a lock is built to eventually open. What if this was never a lock? What if it was a wall, built by a man who understood, better than almost anyone in his century, exactly how dangerous a clear answer could be? That is a heavier idea than a mixed-up nationality. It means the mystery sitting in front of modern scientists might not be an accident of missing records. It might be the last working part of a 500-year-old act of self-protection. And if that is even partly true, it means the concealment worked. It worked on his biographers. It is working on a forensic lab today. None of this stands alone as proof, and it should not be treated that way. So look at how the pieces actually sit beside each other. The Genoese archive is real and strong, but almost entirely built from Columbus's adult life after fame gave him a reason to fix his own story in place. The abandoned Italian is real and unexplained by that same archive. The 2024 genetic claim is real as a claim, but unpublished, unreviewed, and, by its own wording, only compatible with a broader region, not proof of anything specific. And in 2026, a separate research group added another layer entirely, working not from Columbus's own remains, but from his documented descendants. Comparing shared genetic segments across a reconstructed family tree spanning 16 generations, they proposed a link to Galician nobility in Spain, identifying one ancestor whose removal from the model made the genetic connection between two later relatives disappear completely. It is a striking result. It is also a preprint, not yet independently reviewed, and it says something about people who came after Columbus, not about the man himself. Put plainly, none of these records are lies, and none of them are verdicts. A will is one kind of evidence, a signature is another, a language choice is another, an unpublished DNA claim is a fourth, weaker one. A descendant's family tree is a fifth, even further removed. Each captures something real and misses something else. None of them alone tells you who Columbus actually was. Together, they tell you the official story was never as settled as it sounded, and that the uncertainty itself has a shape, a direction, and possibly a reason. So the real question was never simply whether he was Italian or something else. That question assumes a clean answer is sitting somewhere waiting to be found if only the right lab ran the right test. The harder, more honest question is this. Why did a man this famous, this documented, this obsessively written about, choose to leave his own origin permanently unclear, and then spend the rest of his life defending that unclear version as if it were simple fact? The cipher above his signature was never solved. Maybe it was never meant to be. Maybe the truest thing Christopher Columbus ever wrote about himself is the one part of his handwriting that nobody has ever been able to read. And once you see the pattern here, it is hard not to wonder how many other names from that era carry the same quiet architecture. How many family trees were shaped on purpose to survive an inquisition rather than to record a truth? How many origin stories that look simple in a textbook were actually built brick by careful brick by people who understood that being clearly known in that century, in that country, was not always a privilege. Sometimes it was a risk nobody could afford to take. The old story about Columbus was not a lie. It was something stranger than a lie. It was exactly what its author wanted it to be, and 500 years later, it is still doing its job.